And after the Vietnam War, the same thing happened. The Vietnam War was one factor, a major factor, in fact, in causing the ferment of the 1960s, and that caused a lot of concern, deep concern, which still exists, incidentally, because they haven't been able to overcome it. The 60s created what liberal elites called a crisis of democracy. That's the title of a quite important book on all of these topics. The first, and in fact only book-length publication of the Trilateral Commission, published in 1975, called The Crisis of Democracy. It's about the problem of governability of democracies. And there was a problem of the governability of democracies because people were getting out of hand. The domestic enemy was getting out of control, and something had to be done about it. The Trilateral Commission puts together liberal corporate and state elites from the three major centers of state capitalism: Western Europe, the United States, and Japan. That's why the Trilateral. And it is the liberal elites. This is the group around Jimmy Carter. It's where he came from, in fact, and virtually all of his cabinet and top advisors. It's that segment of opinion. The American rapporteur, the guy who gave the report for the United States, was again Samuel Huntington, and he pointed out that Truman had been able to govern the country with the cooperation of a relatively small number of Wall Street lawyers and bankers. Then there was no crisis of democracy. That's the way things were supposed to be. And incidentally, this kind of vulgar Marxist rhetoric is not untypical of internal documents in the government or in the business press and so on. And this was intended to be an internal document. They didn't really expect people to read it. But it's worth reading. I'm sure the library has it. They should. But now this crisis of democracy had erupted. What had happened was during the 1960s, all sorts of segments of the population that are normally apathetic and passive and obedient and don't get in the way suddenly began to become organized and vocal and raise questions and press their demands in the political arena. And that caused an overload. It caused a crisis of democracy. You couldn't just govern the country with a few Wall Street lawyers and bankers any longer. You had all these other pressures coming from the general population. And that's a problem. And we got to overcome the problem. And the way to overcome the problem, they said, all three, the whole group, is to introduce more moderation in democracy to mitigate the excess of democracy. That means, in short, to return the general population to their apathy and passivity and the obedience which becomes them. That's the stupid and ignorant masses have to be kept out of trouble. And when you get these crises of democracy, you've got to restore the norm that we had before. Well, that's a view that goes right back to the origins of the Republic. If you read the sayings of the Founding Fathers, you will discover that that was essentially their view as well. They also regarded the public as a dangerous threat. The way the country ought to be organized, as John Jay put it, the President of the Constitutional Convention and the first Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, one of his favorite maxims, according to his biographer, was that those who own the country ought to govern it. And if they can't govern it by force, they got to govern it another way, and that ultimately requires deception, propaganda, indoctrination, the manufacture of consent.